The text came from a number I did not recognize. A Saturday morning, October. I was at my desk in the apartment I rented in Pacific Beach, with coffee and a project deadline, and no particular reason to expect anything unusual. The text said, "Hi, checking in tomorrow at 3 p.m., just confirming. Is the key under the mat or in a lockbox? So excited for the stay." I looked at the message for a moment. Wrong number, I thought. I typed, "I think you have the wrong number. What address?" They sent the address. I read it twice. Then I read it again. It was the address of the apartment my parents had given me for graduation 18 months ago. The one-bedroom in North Park they had purchased as a gift. A down payment on my future, my father had said, something that is yours and that no one can take from you. Something that is yours. I set down my coffee. I opened Airbnb on my phone. I typed in the address. The listing came up immediately. Charming North Park one-bedroom with rooftop access and natural light. Superhost. 4.9 stars. 47 reviews going back 14 months. The host profile. James and Linda Chen. My parents. My parents had been renting my apartment on Airbnb for 14 months. The apartment that was registered in my name. The apartment they had told me was mine. I looked at the reviews. 47 of them. Guests describing the space in detail. The kitchen I had picked the tiles for. The bathroom I had chosen the fixtures for when my mother had taken me to the showroom and said, "Pick whatever you love. This is yours." The listing price? $165 a night. I opened a calculator. I put down the calculator. I called my attorney instead. My name is Lily Chen. I am 26 years old. I grew up in the Bay Area, in a family where education was the primary currency, and where my parents' definition of success had been built around credentials and stability rather than risk. My father is a civil engineer. My mother managed a dental practice for 20 years. They are not wealthy people. They are careful people who had saved for decades with specific intentions for the savings. I graduated from UC San Diego with a degree in communications at 24. The graduation gift had been announced 3 months before the ceremony. My parents had been saving, my father said, since I started college, and they wanted me to have something real when I finished. The apartment had been purchased in my name. They had handled the process, the search, the offer, the closing, while I was finishing my final semester. I had signed the documents at the kitchen table during spring break, the same table where I had done homework for 18 years. And my mother had made the dumplings she made for every significant occasion, and my father had been quieter than usual in the way he got when something mattered to him more than he knew how to say. I had not lived in the apartment. This is important, and I want to be precise about it. I had not lived in the apartment because I had accepted a job in Pacific Beach that came with a company housing arrangement for the first 2 years. The timing had been coincidental. The job offer had arrived 6 weeks after my parents announced the apartment gift. I had told them about the housing arrangement, and they had said, "The apartment will be there when you need it. It is not going anywhere." They had been right that it was not going anywhere. They had simply not mentioned that it was going somewhere every weekend for $165 a night. The Airbnb listing had been created in August, 2 months after my graduation. I know this because the listing creation date is visible in the host profile metadata and because the first review was dated August 19th, 8 weeks after my parents had handed me the keys at the graduation dinner, and my mother had cried a little, and my father had said, "This is yours, Lily. We want you to have something solid." August 19th, 8 weeks after that dinner. 47 reviews, 14 months. At an average occupancy rate consistent with a 4.9-star superhost, which my parents apparently were, which means they had been doing this long enough and well enough to build a reputation. The revenue calculation was not complicated. My attorney, a woman named Michelle, who I had used for a lease review the previous year, ran the numbers on a Saturday afternoon while I sat across from her with the Airbnb listing pulled up on my phone. Michelle said, Lily, at the pricing and occupancy rates visible in the public listing data, 14 months of hosting at this performance level would generate approximately $30,000 to $33,000 in net revenue after Airbnb's service fees. I said, "The deed is in my name." Michelle said, "Yes, the property is legally yours. The income generated from renting a property you own is legally yours. Your parents have been collecting income from your property for 14 months without your knowledge or consent." I looked at the 47 reviews. A family from Portland who had loved the rooftop. A couple from Japan who had found the neighborhood walkable and charming. A woman traveling alone for a work conference who had said the host was responsive and the space was exactly as described. My space, described by my parents, to 47 strangers. For $165 a night, Michelle said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I need 24 hours. The 24 hours I had asked for were not spent deciding whether to act. They were spent understanding the full picture before I spoke to my parents. Because I had learned, from Michelle, from professional experience, from basic logic, that a conversation entered without complete information is a conversation the other person can shape with whatever information you do not yet have. I pulled every document connected to the property, the deed, my name, no co-ownership, no encumbrances, the property tax records, my name, payments had been made, I checked the county records, on time every year, from an account I did not recognize. I called the county assessor's office. The account making the property tax payments was registered to James Chen, my father. I sat with that. My father had been paying the property taxes on my apartment out of his own account, while collecting rental income that belonged to me. This was not straightforward financial abuse. This was something more complicated. A person who had given me something, maintained it financially, and also been taking income from it without telling me. The intentions and the actions were not a clean story. I called Michelle back. I said, "My father has been paying the property taxes." Michelle said, "How much annually?" I told her the amount from the records. Michelle said, "The tax payments offset the rental income he collected. The net, the amount your parents retained beyond operating costs, is closer to $28,000 over the 14 months. I said, "They were paying to maintain my property and keeping the profit from it." Michelle said, "That is one characterization. Another characterization is that they were managing an asset in your name without your authorization and retaining income that legally belonged to you." I said, "I know." I looked at the Airbnb listing again. The photographs were good. The description was warm. The responses to guest reviews were gracious and specific. My mother had been a superhost for 14 months. I could see her in it. The care, the attention to detail, the specific pride she took in doing things well. She had been doing this well. She had simply been doing it with something that was mine. If you have ever found out that someone who loved you had been making decisions about something you owned because they thought they knew better than to ask, you already know why this story exists. Subscribe and hit the bell. New story every day. I called my parents on Sunday evening, both of them together. My father answered, and I asked him to put my mother on as well. I said, "I need to talk to you about the North Park apartment." My mother said, "Oh, Lily." I said, "A guest texted me by accident on Saturday morning about checking in." Silence on both ends. I said, "I looked up the listing. I called my attorney. I have the full picture of what has been happening for the past 14 months. I am not calling to argue. I am calling because I need to understand something before we go further." My father said, "Lily, let me explain." I said, "Dad, I want to ask one question first. When you gave me the apartment, when you said it was mine and that no one could take it from me, did you know you were already planning to rent it?" A very long silence. My father said, "We thought it would be empty. We thought, why let it sit when you weren't using it? We were going to tell you." I said, "When?" My mother said, "When the time was right. When you moved in and we transitioned it to you. I said, 14 months, Mom, 47 guests, $31,000 in revenue. My mother said, we were saving it for when you needed it. I said, were you? Silence. My father said, most of it. I sat with those 3 words for a moment. Most of it. Not all of it. Most. I said, I need you to both listen to me the way I am listening to you. You gave me an apartment. You told me it was mine. You then used it to generate income without telling me for 14 months. I do not know yet what I am going to do about this legally. What I know is that I need the listing taken down today, and I need a full accounting of every dollar of revenue collected and every dollar of expense paid. My mother said, Lily, we were trying to help. I said, I know you were. That is the hardest part of this. I know you were trying to help, and I know you love me, and I also know that what you did was not something you had the right to do without asking me. My father said, we'll take it down. I said, today. My father said, today? Yes. I said, I'll talk to you both again after I've spoken to Michelle. I hung up. I sat in my apartment in Pacific Beach for a long time, not crying, not angry exactly, something in between the two that did not have a clean name, the specific grief of finding out that a gift came with a condition you were not told about and that the people who gave it loved you and also did not ask. The listing came down that Sunday. I confirmed it myself. Michelle and I met on Monday to discuss the accounting request and the options. The accounting my parents provided showed $31,400 in total revenue over 14 months. Against that, property tax payments of $4,800, a plumbing repair of $900, 2 sets of linens and towels my mother had purchased for the guests, and the Airbnb host fees. Net revenue retained by my parents, $23,200. My parents had $21,000 of it in a savings account they had opened in my name. They showed me the account number and the statements. The remaining $2,200 had been spent on household expenses over the 14 months. I sat with the savings account statement for a long time. $21,000. Saved in my name, without my knowledge, by parents who had started a business on my property without asking me, and who had been, in their own accounting of what they were doing, saving most of the proceeds for me. Most. Not all. Most. Michelle said, Lily, you have several options. You can pursue the full amount, including the portion spent on household expenses. You can accept the $21,000 and close the matter formally, or you can negotiate something between those positions. I said, what do you recommend? She said, that depends entirely on what this relationship is worth to you and what outcome actually serves you. I thought about my father being quieter than usual at the kitchen table when I signed the documents. My mother's dumplings. 47 reviews from guests who had been well taken care of in a space my parents had maintained while I lived somewhere else building a career. I said, draft an agreement. The $21,000 transferred to me. A formal acknowledgement that the property is mine and that any future use requires my written consent. And a clause that the $2,200 is forgiven. Michelle said, you're forgiving the $2,200? I said, they paid the property taxes for 14 months. I'm choosing to consider it even. Michelle said, that's generous. I said, it's accurate. The agreement was signed 3 weeks later. The $21,000 was in my account on the 1st of the following month. I moved into the North Park apartment in January. The rooftop is exactly as the guests described it. My mother had placed a small plant on the kitchen windowsill during one of the guest turnovers and never removed it. I water it every Sunday. I have not decided yet whether to tell her I kept it. I am 26 years old and my parents rented out an apartment they gave me as a graduation gift for 14 months without telling me and without my consent. The first thing, owning something and knowing what is happening to it are not the same. The deed to that apartment had my name on it from the day my parents handed me the keys. I was the legal owner. The property was registered in my name, and the legal protections of ownership were mine. None of that protected me from 14 months of rental income flowing to my parents because I was not paying attention to what was happening to a property I was not using. Own your things. Also watch your things, especially the things you are not using. If you own a property you are not occupying, check the county records periodically. Search your address on short-term rental platforms once a year. The check takes 5 minutes. What it protects you from is not limited to parents with good intentions who overstepped. It also protects you from unauthorized subletting, squatters, and the wide variety of ways that an unoccupied property can be used without the owner's knowledge. The second thing is about what my parents did and how to understand it. My parents gave me an apartment. They then used it to generate income without asking me. They saved most of that income for me in an account in my name. They paid the property taxes from their own money. They maintained the property well enough to achieve superhost status. They did not ask me. This is the thing I have returned to most in the months since. Not what they did with the property, why they did not ask. The answer I have arrived at is that asking would have required them to admit that what they were planning was something I might say no to, and they had convinced themselves that because they were saving the money for me and maintaining the property well, the question of whether to ask was less important than the outcome they were producing. This is how people who love you justify overstepping. They focus on the outcome and bypass the question of whether you would have chosen it. The outcome was $21,000 in a savings account in my name and 47 well-reviewed guest stays and a superhost badge. The question they did not ask was, "Lily, is this all right with you?" It would have taken 30 seconds. The third thing is the most practical, and I want to say it directly. If your parents or anyone in your family ever offers you an asset as a gift, a property, a vehicle, a business interest, anything with financial value, have a direct conversation about expectations before you accept it. Not because every gift comes with hidden conditions, because some gifts come with unstated assumptions about how the asset will be used and who has the right to use it, and what the relationship between the gift and the giver looks like going forward. A gift is cleanest when both parties understand exactly what is being given and what is not. My parents gave me an apartment. They also, in their own understanding, gave themselves a role in that apartment that they had not told me about. The conversation we should have had before the closing would have taken 20 minutes. It would have cost us 14 months and $23,000. Have the 20-minute conversation. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Tell me in the comments, has someone ever done something with something that belonged to you because they told themselves the outcome justified not asking? And which moment stayed with you longer? Reading my parents' name on the Airbnb listing or my father saying most of it? I read every single one. If this story reached you today, subscribe. New story every day. Lily Chen, San Diego, California.